Welcome to another edition of What Really Matters. I'm Gary Sutton, and we're with Charlie Giroux. He's running for the Republican nomination for governor here in the state of Pennsylvania. And each week on What Really Matters, we talk about a special word. Well, this week's word is education. And I would dare say that what people are talking about around the country right now, and particularly here in Pennsylvania and places like Virginia nearby, is education, Charlie. I know when we talk about education, we start with your birth. And your birth mother sent you to this country for some education. Talk a little bit about that before we get started on this.
She did. As you know, Gary, though I've lived in Pennsylvania longer than almost all the candidates running for governor, I wasn't born here. And I was born in a slum in southern Brazil in poverty that we can't really even imagine here in the U.S. My birth mother realized that she couldn't take care of me, so she took me to a little mission and put me up for adoption. And she asked for only one thing. She made it very, very clear that she wanted her baby to be adopted by Americans, because she thought that in the greatest country in the history of the world, I might be able to learn how to read. So her dream, which really was the American dream, was centered around education.
You think about the products in our country today, and we talk about the economy and inflation and everything else, but the number one product that we want to put out in our country today are children, our education. Making sure we put an educated child out there that's going to be successful in this land of opportunity you talked about. Get into that a little bit, if you would.
Well, both you and I have been educators,
Right.
Gary, so we're deeply committed to education, and we know that if we lose our kids, we lose everything. And in Pennsylvania, every child is guaranteed, constitutionally guaranteed, a thorough and efficient education. But unfortunately, too many of our public schools are failing us. And so we've really got to look at a variety of different solutions, real fixes that are going to take some tough work on the part of the General Assembly and the governor's office to make happen. But we can have a world-class education in Pennsylvania, which will propel us through the next century and really provide for the prosperity we want and the opportunities we want for every Pennsylvanian.
I've read a lot of articles recently, Charlie, that have talked about the idea that this is the year of the parent in the elections. And I would dare say across the state of Pennsylvania that would be true as well. Parents have had a chance during COVID to see their kids' education up close and personal and get interested in curriculum and things that maybe they didn't see before. You know, when we went to school and you told your parents, hey, I did my homework at school today, and they bought it. Now the homework was coming home.
I never said that.
No. And so anyway, but the idea was that, you know, now parents are saying, you're learning what? What's that book you're reading? And so there's questions out. So the year of the parent in education is very important. And a lot of parents are feeling very disrespected by some of the things that our educators, turn governors, turn representatives are saying out there. Your thoughts about the parents and where they fit into the curriculum, where they fit into the educational process, because in loco parentis, last I checked, is still being used by schools in place of parents when they're there for, say, 8 hours during the day.
Well, parents being in charge is really a very powerful thing, and
Right.
Parents being involved is a very, very good thing. And you're right, parents have had a chance to look at curriculums, look at what's really going on inside our educational system, seeing what our kids are being not taught but indoctrinated with, and they've pushed back. The school board elections last fall became really, really significant and really important. And typically, as you know, Gary, school board elections aren't paid much attention to. In fact, you often have a hard time even getting candidates to run for those seats. But last year you had write-in candidates, et cetera, winning school board seats because parents really rose up. And I think parent involvement is vitally important. And, you know, the family unit and the breakdown of the family unit has been one of the real problems for our educational system. And so having parents involved, in my judgment, is a really positive thing. I want to make sure that parents are in charge.
And it's not an either-or proposition. It's what's the partnership? When I was a teacher for 25 years, it was how do we establish better partnerships here? It seems to me we're missing the boat by not saying more about that and how to establish partnerships with parents of all kinds out there.
Well, that's it. And I mean, it's working with parents. And part of the problem, as you know, Gary, is that a lot of families aren't intact. So you've got single parent situations, et cetera. But working with parents to really provide the best education possible. But we've got to get away from some of the things that are hidden in our curriculum that parents are now discovering. Critical race theory, the 1619 movement, you know, the transgender sports stuff in our schools. I mean, some of this stuff is really beyond comprehension that just a couple of years ago we would have thought crazy.
You know, we talk about the idea of fairness and justice in our country. And I saw the state house was able this week to pass a bill with regard to equal rights for girls in sports that were going against the transgender kind of thing we're seeing at the University of Penn with Leah Thomas, where, men are changing over to women, then want the same access. Well, their choice should not necessarily change the choices for the majority of people who are staying with the gender they were born with.
The vast majority, Gary.
Right.
I mean, the overwhelming majority. We get this stuff turned on its head so that we're focusing all of our attention on a very, very, very tiny minority. But the thing is, you and I shared a moment a couple
Right.
of years ago coaching young women in basketball. These were pretty elite athletes, girls that were going to get college scholarships. They only play with 5. If you put 2 men on that court, you know what's going to happen.
Right.
2 ladies, 2 girls, 2 young women are going to be sitting on the bench. And there is, to me, just such a travesty because you know how hard these young ladies work, these young girls and young women work. They're so dedicated to their sport. They eat right, they stay in shape, they practice hours and hours and hours when nobody's watching, in addition to the regular team practices, etc. They ought to be able to realize the rewards of their effort. And when you take them off the court, you're denying them that. Furthermore, when you take them off the court and put them on the bench, you're pushing 2 girls on the end of the bench completely out of the program and out of the process. I mean, that's terrible. It's terrible. And we're doing it in the name of what?
Yeah. And on the 50th anniversary of Title IX, where
It
we
turns Title
wanted to
IX on
help
its head.
women out with
Yeah.
being able to do all the things that they could humanly do. And that's something that I look at as well. So let's come back to the curricular part of the schools. The idea of are we going to have education or indoctrination? That's really where we're at right now in terms of the big question. That's what a lot of people are talking about that really is important.
And that's a huge issue, Gary.
Right.
And we've got to get rid of the indoctrination that we've been seeing across the Commonwealth. But when we do that, what are we going to replace it with? And I say we've got to get back to teaching basics, most notably civics. And I know you were a civics teacher once upon a time and know how vitally important that is. And in a lot of schools, they're not doing it anymore. So I believe we ought to not only teach civics, but as a naturalized citizen to this nation, a legal immigrant who became a citizen by choice,
Right.
I had to pass a citizenship test. And I wonder how many of my friends and neighbors could pass that test on the first run. So my proposal, a somewhat modest proposal, but I think a really, really significant one, is to require every graduating senior from a Pennsylvania high school to pass a basic citizenship test in order to get a diploma. Because then you would know that they'd read the United States Constitution, had a little bit of an understanding about the rule of law, had been taught some of the founding fathers' views about our great republic, and been taught a little bit about our history and what makes us so truly exceptional in the world. Rather than trashing the United States of America and all that we've been and all that we are, they'd have a respect, a healthy respect for who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, and I think that would have tremendous benefits societally.
The face of education in our Commonwealth has changed significantly over the years, from where we mostly said, well, public education, maybe parochial schools, but now we've got cyber schools, we've got charter schools, charter academies everywhere. What would Governor Charlie Giroux do in terms of recognizing that whole face of public education, and what would, beyond what the proposal was you just mentioned a moment ago, what other things might you suggest that would be good for Pennsylvania in terms of getting a grip around that whole picture? Well,
you mentioned a variety of things that are going on right now that I think are good, but there's another one, and that's homeschooling. A lot of parents today are homeschooling, and particularly after the pandemic that really caused everybody to homeschool, there's an increase in homeschooling. My judgment has always been, Gary, that if we had more Catholic parochial schools, evangelical Christian schools, charter schools, whether cyber or brick and mortar, and homeschooling, that ultimately the public schools would do better, because competition is a good thing anywhere. And if you've got true competition in education, I think the public schools do even better, and they thrive, and our kids will thrive as a result.
What are your thoughts about school choice for people who are living in places where less than a good education? Obviously, everyone wants their kid to have a great education, maybe perhaps a chance to read, and as your mother had for you. Talk a little bit about that, school choice.
Well, school choice is very, very important, Gary, because there are too many kids that are trapped, literally trapped, because of where they live in a failing school. And their parents don't want them to go to school there, but they don't have the wealth that other people do to send their kids to alternative schools. If you're rich, you can send your kid to private schools, no problem. But if you're not, It's very, very difficult to do that. So I believe that we ought to have school choice, that the dollars ought to follow the student to the greatest extent possible. I worked very, very hard many years ago to help put together the EITC, the Education Improvement Tax Credit, which is a form of school choice, and have promoted the increased funding of that every year. Right now, Gary, there are tens of thousands of kids that want those educational scholarships to go to schools of their choice, but can't get them simply because there's not enough money in the program. So those challenges, I think, are relatively easy to meet. We have to do it.
Sounds like you're trying to put together some partnerships there, too, between private industry and between the public sector as well.
And that's what
getting that
EITC
funded.
is? Yeah, absolutely,
exactly.
Gary.
Yeah. When we look at a modern education day, reading, writing, arithmetic, that's what we always used to say. But what's in a modern education for the Pennsylvania child today, and what would a Governor Charlie Giroux do to push that?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's STEM within the traditional confines of academia, science, technology, math, etc. But increasingly, Gary, our education system is going to move and should move away from the traditional four-year college after high school. An awful lot of young people are going to do better for themselves, for their families, with a trade. And so vocational education, I think, becomes increasingly important. My son went to Vo-Tech. He loved it. He went on to a four-year college, but not all of his classmates did. But the one thing they did do is they all went to a job. They had real jobs paying, significantly decent wages so that they could support themselves and a family. And so I think that's a big part of how we look at education now, is not only what's the curriculum going to be within the typical academic trend, or track rather, but beyond the academic track, how about the students that want vocational education and want to pursue something other than a four-year liberal arts degree?
There was a report that came out of Penn State not too long ago that talked about black children in Pennsylvania having unequal access to quality preschool. What can you do to try to equal up the playing field here for people in the urban areas especially to try to get equal access to preschool?
Well, I'm not familiar with that study. I'm really not. And, there are some issues related to preschool or pre-K.
Right.
But I think that it is funded at this point where it should be. I think it's going to be allowing kids to get access to that.
And that's the important thing, I think, and I know you're for equal education across the board. Finally, I saw last year we went in 2021 from 38th to 41st in the country in public education. Yet we spend, I think, the 10th highest amount in the country. So how do you figure that one out? 10th highest amount, but we're getting 41st results. What would you do to try to bring those numbers much closer together?
Well, accountability is really the key, Gary. Every time we talk about education up the street at the Capitol, it's always more money, more money, more money, which is really another way of saying let's stick our hands deeper into the pockets of the taxpayers. And additionally, at the local level, you've got school districts that are asking for tax increases when they have huge reserves, which means they're holding the taxpayers' money, but they want more of it in addition. So I don't think it's a matter of simply providing or pushing more and more of the taxpayers' money into the education system. I think it's much more a situation now where we've got to look at accountability, look at results, measure metrics. If you can't measure it, and I think there are some real warning signs about how we're spending the money. I think we can spend it much more efficiently, much more frugally, can be better stewards of it, and ultimately can provide a better education for our students.
I've had a chance to talk to Charlie Giroux today about the things that really matter, what really matters, the very things you're talking about around your kitchen table right now. You can talk to him too. You can call him. 717-877-8194 is the number. Did I get it right?
I didn't even have to say it.
You didn't have to say it this time. Give Charlie a call. He's the guy that's going to answer the phone, and I know it's hard to believe. No red tape, no bureaucrats, nothing. Charlie Giroux, 717-877-8194. He's running for governor here in the state of Pennsylvania. Until next time, I'm Gary Sutton for What Really Matters.
Businessman, conservative, patriot, Charlie Giroux for governor.